Good evening. How are you all? So it is delightful to be here at RJ Julian's tonight. My husband Rick is far better public speaker than I am, and he has said to me, it is always best to start with gratitude. And so I have so many things to be grateful for. I really want to thank RJ Julia Books and Kathy and Kate, especially for setting up the magic of these events and having this amazing space that people can come to. And even though circumstances kept her from attending, I also want to thank Liza Fix, because it was her support and her generous introduction that probably made this possible. So heal well, Liza.
Thank you.
And most especially, I want to thank you for coming and supporting a local author. I know everyone has plenty of things to do with their time, and I definitely appreciate you coming out tonight. We all have stories. We have plenty of stories in our heads, and we have plenty of stories to tell from our lives. And all of our stories will start with our families, for good or for ill. Now, my parents are long departed, but they still live on through me. My mother, Betty, is kind of the OG, tough as nails woman. She would suffer no fools. She was a Navy wave during World War II. So that kind of gives you an idea about her. And she did not have any patience with anyone who would cross her. And so I believe you can see some of that come out in my protagonist, in Cat Wallace there. My father, George, is the man who inspired my love of reading. He would be thrilled with the idea of me writing. He was the man who made sure that he always wrote the check for the Scholastic books. And I believe he thought it was his goal was to make sure that I always had the most books coming home when the Scholastic book order came in. He also gave me my love of libraries. When we lived in the Midwest, he would work at the library and select books for the bookmobile. And that went to all the little rural places. And I got to go along and take the day off of school a few times and pick out children's books. And sometimes I'd gravitate over to the books that weren't always children's books. So that is something that he gave me. He was also born under a wandering star, and he liked to travel. So we have lived all over the US and throughout the world as well. So the roots of the series that I have written kind of began through my dad and his wandering star nature. They started out on a freighter to Australia when I was 8 years old, where a real life sea captain who decided that little 8-year-old me reminded him of his daughter, who was now grown, decided to take me under his wing and walk me and let me help inspect the ship. And he would tell me stories. And so he would talk about pirates, and he would talk about a variety of things. And so pirate stories started growing in my head as I would play make-believe on the ship as we steamed over the dateline and steamed over the equator. That root has been germinating, and it has been growing over the years. And eventually it blossomed into my series, Pirates of New Earth. And Pirates of New Earth is this sweeping 4-book series about strength and resiliency. It is set 300 years in the future. This future sees old Earth dramatically changed because of fires and floods and famines and pandemics. And I don't know if that sounds a little close to home. Oftentimes now when I see the news come on and I see a story about a fire or a flood, I think, did I write fiction? I'm not sure. The thing about an apocalyptic or a post-apocalyptic story is oftentimes we associate that with kind of a barren wasteland. But I don't see the future as that way, no matter what happens, because of the human spirit. We will always be resilient, we will always move forward, and we will always try and make our lives better. So this series follows Cat Wallace through her life as she grows from a traumatized, enslaved young woman. She's very headstrong and angry, and she grows into an adult woman who's going to ferociously protect her children and her family as she takes on the mantle of leadership and a pirate nation that adopts her. And she will become a leader that's going to seek to end human trafficking, which has become an ancillary part of New Earth. The first book in the series is A Merry Life. It is was called by Pulitzer Prize winning author Debbie Applegate a fantastically fast-paced page turner. So Cat Wallace was taken from her rural home by traders, and she was enslaved to a very sadistic man. But in time, Cat escaped the pirate nation to the pirate nation of Bosch, and she became the adopted daughter of the leader, Teddy Bosch, who's the master commander. Now, Bosch pirates developed a good 100 years before the events of Pirates of New Earth, after they themselves escaped enslavement. But in the time that Cat meets them, they're no longer seafaring marauders. They're boisterous, opportunistic entrepreneurs who are expert pilots. They do sail at times, but they fly amazing vessels. They will rescue people for a price. And they also supply the drug glitter to the rest of the planet, which has some moral gray areas to it. With hard work and determination, Cat has now taken her place and has become an expert in all of those areas. And I want to do a small reading here where we meet Cat through the eyes of a man who has come to Bosch to find the best pirate to help rescue a countryman of his. Now, note, Cat is a pirate, and so she uses salty pirate language. And Cat would not hesitate and would not care if she offended anyone. But I prefer not to, so I will substitute during this reading the words, things like freak and shoot, in various forms for other words. The master commander signaled to the young man who had served them drinks. "Show her in, please." Takai looked up as a woman, perhaps in her mid-20s, barreled into the office as the red-haired youth hustled to close the door that she had left hanging open. "What the freak, Teddy? Why am I cooling my heels outside while you're drinking the whiskey that I gave you with these schmucks?" She turned to get herself a glass, and the assistant set a full one in her hand. Her smile glowed at him. "Hey, thanks, Cal. At least somebody here has manners." The boy's face lit up at the compliment, and he grinned, showing teeth that were far too large for his face. She set the drink on the commander's desk, and as she dragged a chair from a seating area over, flopped down in it, picked up her drink, and put her feet on the MC's desk, and then downed the drink in one go. "So, what do y'all want from me?" The woman looked around at the three men. Takai was fascinated. He had never seen a performance like this before and had traveled widely. He looked at her with a practiced eye. She was of average height, though tall by Edenese standards, but no matter, Takai was tall for an Edenese man as well. It was hard to tell in her long-sleeved, loosely belted uniform what her figure was like, but she wasn't petite. Her shoulders were broad, and he could sense pleasing curves under the fabric as she moved her body back and forth through the room. Her neck was slender and had a scar that snaked its way into the front of her uniform. Her lips were full, and she wore her light brown hair short and with soft curls covering the back and waves that accentuated her blue-green eyes that sparkled as she talked. This was not what Takai envisioned when he thought pirate. The master commander smiled indulgently. This would be Corporal Katrina Wallace. She's one of those children I mentioned earlier, only this one I found under my helm one day while returning from a glitter mission. Cat laughed. I had to get here any way I could. Cal set another drink at her in front of her, and she bestowed him with that glowing smile again. What would it be like to see that smile beam up at me? Takai wondered. He gave an inward shake of his head and refocused on the task at hand. There would be time for recreation after the rescue. Cap, this is Captain Mark Vaughn and Commander Takai Shima. Gentlemen, this is Cat. A pleasure, Corporal, the guy began. Let me brief you. No need, said a cat abruptly. I'm like this old fart. She returned the indulgent smile to the master commander. I do use devices, and I'm up to speed on the background of the extraction mission. However, do you have any further details? I don't care how small, that you can add to the information you sent previously. Details? Details, sir, she said impatiently. Like how tall is he? How much does he weigh? Can he shoot? Can he run? Will I be carrying him on my back? Or can he freaking follow directions? Although, given his penchant for adventure in the palace, I think that last one is a pretty firm no. She spoke very fast and allowed no room for response. Kat then tilted her head toward Kai. Details. Oh, details. Well, there is the issue that I'm to accompany the leader of the mission, who I'm to presume is you. Kat set her drink on the table, dropped her feet to the floor, leaned her elbows on the desk, covered her eyes, and sighed heavily. Oh, that is a detail. She opened her hands toward the master commander. Did you know about this? The MC simply shook his head and smiled at her. She sighed. Okay, it'll be fine. She shot a look at Takai. Try not to get yourself killed. And most importantly, do not get me killed. So I have worked in many capacities through my life. I think I started my working life as a berry picker in the summers. But I've worked as retail work and office work. I've taught science and history and English, and one very unfortunate semester teaching math. It was unfortunate for me and probably for all the kids I taught. But the career that I was called to for over 30 years was as a midwife. As such, I have been privileged to meet many strong women and birthing people and families and attend some beautiful moments, both joyous and tragic. Since midwife was how I defined myself for so long, people always assume when I say that I have pivoted to writing, that I have written about midwifery and about birth and about midwives. And many are very surprised when I say, no, pirates. But there is one character in the book that is a midwife, and I do love her. And most everyone who reads about her seems to love her as well. This scene gives us an early introduction to Miriam, who will become Kat's adoptive mama, just after a battered Cat Wallace has arrived in Bosch. As Miriam lay next to her husband in the bed that night, she thought about this Katrina sleeping soundly in the room closest to them across the hall. The young woman had eaten, first sparingly, then with more gusto as the plates of food kept being offered. She had gratefully accepted a glass of Miriam's favorite wine, although she declined a refill. Good girl, Miriam had thought. Keep your wits about you in a new place. Then Miriam had taken her upstairs to bathe her and clean her wounds. The young woman had been polite and appreciative before this, but Miriam could tell she was keeping a tight hold on her emotions. It was not until she was in the bath and Miriam was trying to make sense of her tangled, filthy hair that she broke down into guttural sobs. The torrent of emotion was so strong that Miriam had simply slid into the tub next to her, fully dressed, as she had done countless other times at difficult births. But there was no babe emerging now, just the pent-up grief and agony and anger of a tortured soul. She held her close and encouraged her tears and rocked her back and forth as she had done with her little ones years before. By the time the storm of emotion had passed, the bath water was cold and the bubbles long gone. Katrina had tried to apologize, but Miriam hushed her, drained the tub, and ran a new round of warm water. Then she had gone and slipped out of her wet things and into a robe, bringing up a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. They had sipped and chatted about where Kat was from and what had transpired to bring her here, as Miriam washed her hair and then trimmed it short. She knew there was much the young woman was still holding back, as her body told her history as well, but that was all right. Miriam would listen, as she needed to. She wrapped Kat in soft towels and showed her some of Mimi's stored clothing that she thought would fit her. Then she went downstairs and made a tray of fruit and cheese and brought it up to the bedroom. When she knocked, though, there was no response. She quietly pushed open the door and peeked in. Katrina lay in the bed with the covers pulled around her and one bare arm flung off the side of the bed. Her eyes were closed and she was breathing heavily and steadily. Miriam set the tray of food down on the side table and gently lifted the errant arm and what did she do? There we go, and tucked it in beneath the covers. She smoothed the damp short curls and eyed the bandages that she applied to the neck wound. And then she did as she always did when she tucked her children in. She leaned over and kissed her on the forehead and murmured, "Sweet dreams, child, Mama's near." And to her surprise, the young woman stirred sleepily and rolled over, whispering, "Thanks, Mama." Miriam smiled. So A Merry Life is our introduction to Kat and to the Bosch, as well as to the greater world of New Earth. Kat eventually finds herself living away from Bosch with a husband and children, and her plans to return are upended when her adoptive father asks a favor of her that will change the course of all their lives. When we join Kat in book 2, Navigating the Storm, she's exiled, but she longs to return to Bosch, though her husband is committed to remaining in Edo. Like many of us and most of us when our children were small, she looks longingly for the time when she's going to gain some measure of control over her own life. Navigating the Storm, book 2 in the series, is an incredibly impactful, emotional, entertaining, fun, heart-tugging book, according to Martha Boland of Boland Publishing. In the following reading, we are going to join Kat as she announces to her husband her plans for her future. There's only the hint of wind, so the flakes fall steadily, covering any brown or green that still remains outside, and mounting on the windowsill in a soft rising curve. It's been falling almost daily, which is unusual for mid-November. It's so peaceful in the house. The boys are actually napping, which at 3 years old is a sporadic event at best. I just checked on them, and they're curled with their heads together as if they fell asleep whispering to each other, which is likely exactly what happened. Gray is tucked in on the big bed, wrapped in quilts, reading to her favorite stuffed moose. And Takai is sitting in front of the fire, quietly reading a book on China in the 21st century in the front room. Me? I'm about to detonate a bomb. Hey, love, are you in a place you can pause? I sit down near my husband's knees on the big padded ottoman that opens to hold blankets and quilts, settling the explosive neatly in his lap. Takai looks up from the research tome he's studying and smiles. I wonder if he holds a grudge against the Chinese for imprisoning him years ago. I would. I mean, it worked out. I rescued him and we had our first kiss. Our second. Our third. I refocus on my incendiary. He closes the book, marking his spot with a slip of paper that Gray has drawn pink flowers on, sets it on the nearby side table and stretches and yawns. I need to take a break. I may make myself some tea. Interested? He starts to stand. Maybe, but could you wait a moment? I want to tell you something. I fiddle with the detonation cord. He sits down, looks at me with anticipation written on his face. It's a friendly look. We've been back in the flow since our trip to Bosch, and things have been comfortable and loving. Sure, what's on your mind? He smiles warmly at me, and I see love in his eyes. I set the blasting cap. I take a deep breath and look back at him. I've re-enlisted in the force. Recruitment classes start in 2 weeks, and I've arranged for us to rent the little white house for Mama, who's also willing to help take care of the children when I'm confined to base during the week. Boom. So we live in Mystic. Starting at the beginning of the pandemic, I took a job at the Danbury Birth Center, an hour and a half away from our home. And this story really began to grow stronger during my long commutes to Danbury. Kat would sit in the passenger seat and chat with me about her rollicking adventures. Once Kat and her life percolated in my head for a while, I was obliged to write the tale down, and it all kind of came out fairly rapidly in one 110,000 James Joycean stream of consciousness that I happily required my husband and my children to read. And they all nicely nodded and they liked it. And they also suggested I have other people look at it. And it took a good developmental editor and a critique group to bring home to me the necessity of something called a clear narrative arc. And another thing that seemed to be important was a plot. But delightfully through the process, you know, I went through the rewriting and self-editing, and it became clear that there was not just one book, but there were several books. And so that's how the series began. And delightfully through the process, I came to know not only Kat deeply, but the other characters and their stories. One of the characters that I also came to know is Kat's past enslaver, and basically the Moriarty to her Holmes, Rob Abernathy. His character is such that when I read scenes about him to my husband, he often says, "I'm uncomfortable being around you," because he's not a good guy. But in this scene, Pat has unexpectedly encountered Abernathy after many years of not being in contact with him. And she is at a Federal Alliance event. We're all escorted into a large room with its perimeter lined with tables. The president sits in the center at the far wall, and on his right is Rob Abernathy. I stare at the man, trying to understand how all these people can be oblivious to his cruelty. He looks up from the amused Bosch, and I see him and sees me staring at him. I have his name now, and I think of all the old books I have read that give power to knowing someone's true name. He smiles charmingly, without recognition, and raises his glass. I lift mine in response. The game is on. Through dinner, I continue the game of gazing and smiling. As the salad is cleared, I see the table set for the requested entree. I quietly lift the steak knife that has been set for my neighbor and cover it with my napkin. My fish doesn't require such a tool. And while I'm not intending to kill him, at least not here, not now, it's still good to have a weapon. I decide I've played the anonymous card for the final time. I want him to recognize me. I smile broadly and then turn my neck and run my hand along my scar. For all I know, that doesn't set me apart, but it's all I have from a distance. It works. I see his face cloud as he thinks, and then it clears and his chin lifts. His eyes are aflame as he realizes it's me. I grin and turn my right hand over, raising my middle finger. I see him motion to one of his men. Then he gazes across the room at me and smiles, his most charming, his most predatory smile. I chuckle at the ruse and pull the meat knife from my lap, pointing it upward and rubbing the blade lovingly, never breaking my gaze with him. I want him to know my intention. He wrinkles his brow and looks away. I glance around the room. Most everyone is focused on their meal or on impressing the people around them. However, I see Phil Reston looking at me, and when I catch his eye, he waggles his finger at me as if I'm an errant child. I smile. I maintain eye contact on and off throughout the meal with Rob, alternating between looking coyly at him and making vague gestures with my knife. When the servers clear the table, I hold on to my weapon. I hear the band warm up and then begin a traditional FA song. The president stands and invites his partner to dance. I quickly create a hidden holster for my weapon and make my way towards Abernathy. As I pass Phil Reston, I hear him ask, "What the hell are you doing?" under his breath. I smile beatifically at him. "Just enjoying the evening, Phil. I suggest you do the same." I imagine he is sure I will do something rash, and I may. As I start across the room, I see Abernathy coming my way. I decide to let him cross the distance. He comes upon me. I'd forgotten how tall he was. I look up at him. His face is framed with his boyish blonde hair and is as handsome as the first time I saw it. But now I can see the sinister darkness contained in it. His deep blue eyes, usually devoid of emotion, have the hunger in there that he gets when he needs to hurt someone. How delightful to see you again. Rob Abernathy's voice is warm and smooth. Hearing it again twangs the panic in my brain, but I calm it. He continues, "I'm fascinated to hear how you've appeared here. Shall we dance?" I look into the face of my tormentor and will myself to maintain control. I'm planning to make an early night of it, but I think I can manage a dance and a short conversation. But in case you have any other intentions, Senator Abernathy, I use his name and title intentionally. Be aware. I shift the slits in my dress to show the meat knife tied to my thigh with a white dinner napkin. I will not hesitate to cut your heart out, assuming you have one. So if you would like to read more about Kat and her adventures, Her Life and Navigating the Storm are available now, and they can be purchased here at R.J. Julian. It's also available as an ebook at that online shop. And Married Life is now an audiobook on various platforms. Navigating the Storm will also be available as an audiobook later on this month. Book 3, Burn the Ship, is going to be launched in November and will continue Kat's adventures. The final book of the series is slated to launch sometime after the first of the year. So I'd like to close with gratitude. Thank you all for being here this evening. I am happy to answer any questions, and I encourage you to buy copies of The Married Life and Navigating the Storm for yourself. And the holidays are just around the corner. They would make a lovely gift. And if you like them, please tell your friends, because as my book coach says, no one can read a book that they have not heard of. The more you tell people about it, the better off. So, questions?
Okay. I will kick off the questions, and then if you think of something, please hop in. Can you tell us anything about that was a little bit unexpected that came from Kat, whether she was in the next seat next to you going to Danbury or elsewhere?
Oh, so many things were unexpected. There was a meme I think I saw that said, I don't direct my characters. I just watch them do stupid things and then write the incident report. That is very, very true. The stories they came from, having some make-believe time, but as they fleshed out, the characters took their own route. And that was a surprising thing. And I think it is not an unusual thing. I've certainly heard other authors say that. I've heard people say, that they were complaining to a partner that, I can't believe my character's doing that. And the partner going, but you're the one who created them. It's like, oh, yes and no. I mean, you give birth to them. It's just like having children. You give birth to them and then they're going to take their own path. There is an episode that happens in Navigating the Storm that I have had a couple of people get to and then angrily text me going like, I can't believe you did that. It's like, I didn't like it either, but it had to be done. That is the path that it took. So I think that's one of the most surprising things about the whole process. You can adjust and you can tweak events, but ultimately the characters kind of take their own path.
Other questions?
I heard writers say that in the editing process that they've had to kill their babies when they've had to make difficult editing decisions. What has that been like for you as a writer?
Not all that fun. It's hard to cut things out. And when an editor suggests you cut something out, you have to take that as an important perspective. But ultimately, it's the writer's choice, and I know where the story's going. So sometimes most of the time I will kill some of my darlings. But there are times when I thought, no, I need to leave that in because that's going to become important later. And it's going to be a scene that, even though it might seem unnecessary to the plot at this juncture, it's going to become necessary down the line, which has been kind of an interesting process of having a series, because you have your series arc and each book has an arc to it. One of the good things about editing out and killing the darlings is that it becomes scenes that I can give readers that subscribe to my newsletter, and they can get kind of an insight into the outtakes, as it were. And so that has been kind of a fun thing there.
So you spoke a bit about how, from a young age, you were hearing pirate stories and stuff. What made you want to write pirate stories in the future instead of in the past or present?
That's a real good question. I would have never ever thought that I was going to write a, future science fiction kind of book, although I like science fiction. I like science fiction. I can see I'm pretty broad in the kinds of books I like. But that was I think the nature of where the world is right now with fires and floods and pandemics and famine, and I think we see it accelerating, and we see the changes happening, and it is actually far easier to write in the future than it is in the past. Because if I write about the past, then I have to make sure my research is spot on, which is fun, but being able to have a world that I create, I have a lot of freedom to do that. And it also gives Kat a chance to do some things that she wouldn't be able to do if she was on a ship. She can get in a vessel and fly to Edo, and she can fly a variety of places. So we can kind of have a little bit of that steampunk aspect where she has that technology, but also, they're also the people of New Earth, particularly the Bosch, are very careful about their technology because they had seen what industrialism and such did to the world and how it damaged it. So they're very careful about it, but they do utilize it. And they do maintain the pirate idea of being very egalitarian, and very, very very much people who like all the new things and all the best things, but they also are interested in making the world a better place, at least their world.
And as you created this world, you included what we might call real world issues. How did you decide which issues to include or to focus on, either from the beginning or next?
Well, I mean, I think the real world issues are the issues that are that have been issues for hundreds of years in our past and will undoubtedly be issues as we go forward. The issues of the strong controlling the weak, the issues of for my world, because the human population has been dropped dramatically. That means that there are not a lot of workers, and so for the wealthy who want to have workers, they have to get them in some fashion, and so the way they do that is by enslaving them. Enslavement has been an issue for human beings since we've been around, and it is an issue that dehumanizes some peoples, and it's something that happens now. It has happened in our past. We certainly know, in America's history, but it's still happening. There are still people that are enslaved, and human trafficking is a real thing now. And human trafficking is a real thing then in the future. And it is an issue that Kat feels strongly about and wants to see end. But it's also a huge issue, and it's not really something that one person can stop. And that's something that she's discovering. So yeah, those are those kinds of things. Bosch is very much of a kind of a utopian kind of place. It's very diverse, diverse in race, diverse in sexuality, and everybody is very well accepted. But that's not true in all parts of New Earth. So that is also an issue that I like to include.
I have a question. Right now, you're focused on this 4-book series, and I was wondering, does it spur any ideas for future, not necessarily this subject, but do you have anything else?
Yes, I do. Yeah, there are some spinoffs that could happen. It was, kind of will just, I will have to see where people want to hear about, what people would like to hear more about. But I also, might want to step out and do some other kind of genre. Beyond the speculative fiction kind of thing. And so that I kind of started thinking about that, and then every time I start thinking about that, it's like, no, I need to shut that down right now because I need to focus on getting these things accomplished. But yeah, there is Kat's children, particularly her daughter Gray. There's some great stories that I know of for her, and that may become, and that could be a very nice YA kind of scenario there for young adults.
That's a perfect kind of question for us to finish on. So we do have Navigating the Storm, the second book in the series, and A Married Life. So just want to have those. They're very beautiful and interesting covers as well.
I love
I'm sure
those
we can talk
covers.
more about that. So maybe we'll ask a few more questions while we have you sign in the other room. But please join me in thanking Sarah for a delightful discussion.
Thank you.